The call came on a Tuesday, a day drained of all color. Liam sat in the quiet of his apartment, the silence a heavy blanket that had become his only companion since Clara was gone. The phone buzzed against the polished concrete of his countertop, a harsh, unwelcome intrusion. He saw the name flash on the screen, Arthur Vance, his father-in-law, a man who had never once looked at him without a flicker of disdain. Liam knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in his stomach, why the man was calling. He let it ring 3 times before answering, a small, pointless act of defiance. "Liam," the voice on the other end was not warm. It was clipped, precise, the sound of a judge passing sentence. There were no condolences, no gentle inquiries. Arthur had never been one for social niceties when he felt he held the superior position, which was always. "Arthur," Liam replied, his own voice steady, calm. He would not give the man the satisfaction of hearing him break. "I'm calling to inform you of the arrangements for Clara," Arthur began, the word inform carrying the weight of a royal decree. "The service will be held on Friday at 11 o'clock at St. James Cathedral. It will be followed by a private interment and a reception at our home." Liam waited. He knew the other shoe was about to drop, a steel-toed boot aimed directly at his heart. "I want to be perfectly clear," Arthur continued, his tone hardening further, leaving no room for misinterpretation. "You are not to attend. You are not welcome at the service, you are not welcome at the cemetery, and you are certainly not welcome at our home. The family has decided it is best that you are not present. It would be disruptive." Disruptive. The word hung in the air between them. Liam thought of the 7 years he had spent with Clara, the quiet nights, the shared laughter, the way she would curl into his side as they read in bed. He thought of holding her hand in the sterile, white hospital room, the beeping of the machines, a cruel metronome counting down their final days together. All of that, their entire life together, was being dismissed as a potential disruption. "I see," Liam said. The 2 words were all he could manage, yet he infused them with a quiet dignity that he knew would infuriate Arthur more than any shouting match. "I trust you will respect our wishes," Arthur said. It was not a question. "This is a time for family. We need to grieve without any complications." The implication was clear. Liam was the complication. He, her husband, the man who had loved her more than life itself, was being cast as an outsider, a footnote in the grand, tragic story of Clara Vance. He looked around his apartment, a space the Vances had always considered laughably modest. It was minimalist, yes, but every piece of furniture, every book, every object was chosen with care, a reflection of the life he and Clara had built, a life lived deliberately, away from the ostentatious clutter of her family's world. To them, this quiet sanctuary was proof of his failure, his inability to provide for her in the manner to which they felt she was entitled. They had no idea. They saw a humble architect's assistant, a drafter, as they condescendingly called him, and they saw nothing else. They had never bothered to look deeper. Their blindness was their shield, and Liam knew, with a sorrow that was bone deep, that it would also be their undoing. "Goodbye, Arthur," Liam said softly, and he ended the call before the man could utter another cutting remark. He stood there for a long moment, the phone in his hand, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him once more. He walked over to the large window that overlooked the city, a sprawling tapestry of light and shadow. On a small, elegant writing desk nearby, a single, heavy cream envelope lay waiting. It had been there for a week, a silent testament to a promise made. He ran his fingers over the thick paper, the corner of the seal. Arthur Vance and his arrogant family thought they had won. They thought they had scrubbed the final chapter of Clara's life clean of his presence. They didn't know that Clara had already written the epilogue, and within a week, their carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of pride and willful ignorance, would crumble into dust. It's a terrible thing to be shut out by the people who should be sharing your grief. Have you ever felt like your worth was being judged on superficial things, like your job or how much money you have? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We see you, and we're so glad you're here with us. The story of Liam's quiet, devastating victory is a reminder that the world often gets it wrong, but the truth, eventually, always finds its way into the light. Stay with us as we see how a simple bouquet of flowers started an avalanche that no one saw coming. The roots of the Vance family's disdain for Liam ran deep, anchoring themselves in the fertile soil of class-conscious arrogance the day Clara first brought him home. He remembered the drive to their palatial estate, a sprawling mansion that seemed more like a corporate headquarters than a home. Clara had held his hand, her expression a mixture of love and apprehension. "Just be yourself," she'd whispered, squeezing his fingers. "They'll love you once they get to know you." It was a sweet, hopeful sentiment, and one that would prove to be devastatingly incorrect. The moment they walked through the oversized double doors, the assessment began. Arthur Vance, a man who seemed permanently encased in a tailored suit and a cloud of self-importance, had given Liam a handshake that was less a greeting and more a brief, dismissive appraisal of his physical substance. His eyes swept over Liam's simple but well-made jacket and trousers, and a verdict was reached in an instant. Not one of us. Margaret, Clara's mother, was more subtle. She offered a smile as thin and fragile as spun glass, her eyes performing the same cold calculus as her husband's. Her politeness was a weapon, a beautifully polished barrier designed to keep the unworthy at a comfortable distance. Then there was Eliza, Clara's younger sister. Where her parents practiced a form of civilized condescension, Eliza wielded her contempt like a sharpened blade. "So, you're the architect," she'd said, her tone suggesting it was a slightly embarrassing trade, like chimney sweeping. "I'm a drafter at an architectural firm," Liam had corrected gently, an intentional understatement he and Clara had agreed upon. It was part of their private game, a way to shield their life from the Vances' invasive expectations. "Oh, a drafter," Eliza had repeated, drawing the word out. "Clara, you didn't tell me he was on the staff." The implication was clear. She had imagined someone of stature, a partner at a prestigious firm, not a mere cog in the machine. That first dinner was a masterclass in quiet humiliation. Arthur held court at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, pontificating about market fluctuations and hostile takeovers. He'd occasionally direct a question at Liam, framed as a generous inclusion, but designed to highlight his perceived lack of sophistication. "Liam, you're in the building trade. What's your take on the commercial real estate futures in the third quarter?" It was a verbal trap, and Liam had simply smiled. "I'm more focused on materials and design, Arthur, how things fit together to make a space feel like home." Arthur had grunted, a sound of profound disappointment, and turned his attention to a more worthy conversational partner. Throughout the meal, Liam felt their judgment like a physical weight. They dissected his job, his simple apartment, his lack of a recognizable family name. He was, in their eyes, Clara's charity project, a temporary diversion she would surely grow tired of once the novelty wore off. Christmas 2 years later had been a particular low point. Under the glittering lights of a Christmas tree that was so large it seemed to mock the very concept of a forest, the Vances had presented him with his gift. It was a gift certificate, not to a fine tailor or a bookstore, but to a discount men's apparel warehouse. "We thought this might be helpful," Margaret had said, her smile unwavering, "for your work clothes." Liam had looked at the cheap, glossy card, then at Clara, whose face was a mask of fury and shame. He had simply folded the certificate, placed it in his pocket, and said, "Thank you, Margaret. That's very practical." His refusal to be baited, his unshakable calm, only solidified their opinion of him as a simpleton, a man without the pride or ambition to even recognize an insult. They never knew. They never knew that Liam's quiet, modest life was a deliberate choice. They never knew that the man they dismissed as a lowly drafter was, in fact, the sole owner and principal designer of Keystone Design, one of the most innovative and successful architectural firms in the world. They never knew that he worked under the professional pseudonym Aethelred, a name whispered with reverence in the halls of design museums and on the pages of elite magazines. Aethelred's identity was the industry's best-kept secret, a decision Liam made early in his career to let his work speak for itself, free from the cult of personality. Clara had been the only one he'd ever let into that secret world. She had found it thrilling. She had loved him not for the wealth or the fame he hid, but for the quiet genius and profound integrity that made him hide it in the first place. She, who had grown up suffocated by people who valued her for her family's name and fortune, had found in Liam a man who wanted nothing from her but her heart. His secret was their sanctuary. He let the Vances believe he was nothing because their belief protected what was real. He absorbed their endless slights in condescending remarks like a stone wall, knowing that on the other side of that wall, he and Clara were building a world of their own, a world of genuine love and mutual respect. The Vances saw the wall and thought it was the whole of him. They never once imagined the sprawling, beautiful landscape that lay just beyond their line of sight. In the days that followed Arthur's decree, a strange and profound calm settled over Liam. The initial shock had receded, leaving behind the familiar ache of grief for Clara, but the anger he had expected to feel toward her family simply wasn't there. It was like being angry at the weather. The Vances were a force of nature, predictable in their arrogance, consistent in their cruelty. To rage against them would be a waste of the energy he needed to simply survive the week. Instead, he channeled his focus. He found solace in the clean, certain lines of his work. He sat at his drafting table, not the digital interface he used for his major projects, but an old-fashioned wooden board he kept for personal sketches. With a perfectly sharpened graphite pencil, he drew. He drew the facade of a building, a place of light and air, with soaring windows and spaces that flowed into one another. It was a community arts center, a project he and Clara had been planning for years. She was going to fund it, and he was going to design it. A place for children to learn music, for painters to find a studio, for a community to find its heart. As his hand moved across the paper, translating sorrow into structure, he felt her presence beside him, a warm and steadying influence. This, he knew, was how he would honor her. Not by fighting with her petty, small-minded family, but by building her dream. His business partner, David Chen, did not share his Zen-like acceptance. David, a whirlwind of energy and fierce loyalty, called him twice a day. "Are you sure?" David's voice crackled with indignation through the phone. "Liam, just say the word. I've already had our legal team look into Vance Industries. It's a house of cards, propped up by debt and reputation. We could acquire their primary creditor by lunchtime and have Arthur Vance begging on his knees by sunset. Let me do it. For Clara." Liam looked at the drawing on his desk. He saw Clara's smile, her excitement as she described the sound of children's laughter filling the halls. "No, David," he said, his voice soft but firm. "That's not her way, and it's not my way. There's a plan. Clara made a plan. We follow it." "I still think a hostile takeover would be more satisfying," David grumbled, but he relented. "All right, we wait, but if they so much as breathe in your direction again, I'm unleashing the Kraken." Liam smiled faintly. "I'll let you know." His next call was to a florist, the city's most exclusive, a place called the Gilded Petal. He spoke to the owner himself, a man named Julian, who usually only dealt with event planners for royal weddings. But Julian knew the name Ethelred, and he took the call immediately. Liam didn't use his pseudonym, but his private number afforded him a certain level of access. "I need an arrangement for a funeral," Liam began, and he proceeded to describe, with loving and meticulous detail, exactly what he wanted. He spoke of Clara's love for white lilies, for the deep celestial blue of delphiniums, for the delicate, almost translucent petals of phalaenopsis orchids. He didn't want a standard wreath or a somber spray. He wanted a sculpture, a testament. It should be breathtaking, Liam said. It should be so full of life that it defies the very room it's in. It should feel like hope. Julian was silent for a moment, captivated. It will be a masterpiece, he promised. One more thing, Liam said. The card. It needs to be very specific. He dictated the simple, powerful words, and then gave a second, more unusual instruction for a small item to be attached to the back of the card, addressed only to Eliza. Later that afternoon, a text message illuminated his phone screen. It was from Eliza. Just to be crystal clear, when Dad said don't come, that wasn't a suggestion. Don't embarrass Clara's memory by causing a scene. We have enough to deal with. Liam read the message, each word a tiny, sharp pinprick of the old arrogance. He felt a pang, not of anger, but of pity for her. She was so trapped in the prison of her own prejudice. He looked from the phone to the heavy cream envelope on his desk. It was sealed with a simple wax stamp, an interlocking K and D for Keystone design. A detail so subtle he knew the Vances would never have noticed it, even if they'd seen it. Inside that envelope was the truth, patiently waiting. He felt no need for a scene. A scene was loud, chaotic, and temporary. What was coming was quiet, orderly, and permanent. It was not a storm. It was a changing of the tide. The day of Clara's funeral dawned gray and overcast, the sky a bruised blanket of sorrow. In his apartment, Liam put on the dark charcoal suit Clara had picked out for him years ago. The one she said made him look serious and devastatingly handsome. He knotted his tie with steady hands, his reflection in the mirror a stoic mask that betrayed none of the turbulence within. He would not go to the church. He would not stand in the back and watch from afar. That would be an act of subservience to Arthur's decree, an acceptance of his status as an outcast. His goodbye to Clara would not be on their terms. Instead, he walked to the small bookshelf where Clara kept her photo albums. He pulled one out, its leather cover worn soft with time. It was the first one she had made for him, chronicling the beginning of their life together. He sat in his favorite armchair, the one overlooking the city, and opened it. There they were, younger, impossibly happy, squinting into the sun on a beach trip. There was a goofy picture of him with flour on his nose from a failed attempt at making pizza from scratch. There was Clara, her head thrown back in laughter, a look of such pure, unadulterated joy on her face that it made his throat ache. He spent the morning with her, page by page. He let the memories wash over him, the good and the painful, the quiet moments and the grand adventures. He allowed himself the privacy of his own grief, raw and unfiltered. This was his memorial service. Here, in the sanctuary they had built together, there were no judging eyes, no condescending whispers, no need for performance. There was only love and loss in their most honest forms. When the clock on the wall struck 11, the time of the service, he closed his eyes and whispered her name, a final, silent farewell. Miles away at St. James Cathedral, the scene was entirely different. The cavernous stone church was filled to capacity, a somber sea of black suits and elegant dresses. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the sound of a mournful organ. This was not just a funeral, it was a society event. The mayor was in the third pew. CEOs of major corporations, whom Arthur counted as colleagues, filled the rows behind. The Vance family, seated in the front pew, were the picture of tragic dignity. Arthur stood tall, his face a mask of sorrowful gravitas. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The turnout was excellent. It was a testament to the Vance name, to their standing in the community. He had successfully curated his daughter's final public appearance, ensuring it was elegant, well-attended, and most importantly, free of the embarrassing stain of her low-status husband. He glanced down the pew at his wife, Margaret, who dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and at Eliza, perfectly composed, her grief as tasteful and understated as her black Chanel dress. They were a united front. They were projecting strength. During the eulogy, delivered by a family friend who spoke more of Clara's bloodline than her spirit, Arthur scanned the crowd. He saw architects, developers, and city planners, people he vaguely recognized from industry galas. He assumed, with the casual arrogance that was his default state, that they were here for him, to pay their respects to a fellow titan of industry. The thought never crossed his mind that these people were not here for Arthur Vance, the purveyor of leveraged assets in corporate restructuring. They were here for Ethelred, the brilliant, anonymous designer whose work they deeply admired, and for Clara, the quiet philanthropist who had been the unseen force behind so many of Ethelred's most beloved public projects. They were here to mourn the loss of a partnership that had, without fanfare, been reshaping the soul of their city. Arthur Vance saw only what he wanted to see, a reflection of his own importance. He was the star of his own tragedy, and he remained blissfully, fatally unaware that he was about to be written out of the script entirely. The reception at the Vance estate was a carefully orchestrated performance of grief. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowded rooms, offering champagne and delicate canapes. The mood was hushed and reverent, but beneath the surface, business cards were discreetly exchanged and connections were reinforced. It was, as with all Vance family functions, an exercise in networking, even in the face of death. Arthur moved through the crowd, accepting condolences with a somber nod, his mind already calculating the social capital he was accruing. He had weathered the storm of his daughter's unfortunate marriage and emerged, in his own mind, as the stoic patriarch who had reclaimed his family's dignity. It was then that the flowers arrived. It wasn't a subtle delivery. A large, unmarked van pulled up the sweeping driveway, and two men in overalls began the laborious process of unloading their cargo. The guests in the grand foyer fell silent, their conversations tapering off as the front doors were opened to admit the delivery. It was an arrangement, but that word was wholly inadequate. It was a floral sculpture, a towering cascade of white and blue that was so enormous, so breathtakingly beautiful, it seemed to suck all the air from the room. Thousands of pristine white lilies, deep blue delphiniums, and exotic moon-pale orchids were woven together into a structure that soared towards the coffered ceiling. It was not a gesture of sadness, it was a declaration. It was wild and graceful, a living monument that pulsed with a vibrant, defiant energy. It made every other tasteful, somber bouquet in the house look like a cheap trinket. A murmur went through the crowd. Who could have sensed such a thing? It was too passionate for a corporate entity, too grand for a mere family friend. Arthur, momentarily taken aback by the sheer scale of it, quickly recovered. He assumed it must be from a foreign dignitary or a reclusive billionaire he'd once done business with. It was, he decided, a fitting tribute to the Vance name. He began searching for the card, eager to identify the sender and publicly acknowledge their excellent taste. Eliza, standing near the back of the foyer, found it first. Tucked deep within the forest of lily stems was a small, unassuming envelope of heavy cream cardstock. There was no corporate logo, no ostentatious seal, just her sister's name, Clara, written in a strong, familiar hand she instantly recognized as Liam's. Her first reaction was a surge of hot anger. How dare he? How dare he intrude, even from a distance, with this theatrical, ostentatious display? It was embarrassing. It was a scene. She almost ripped the card in two right there, but she was surrounded by onlookers. With a thin, forced smile, she slipped the envelope open. The message inside was simple, written on a matching card. For Clara, my love, always. She felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but a recognition of the sentiment. Then she saw the words written below, in the same steady hand. Eliza, this is for you. Her brow furrowed. For her? What could he possibly have to say to her? She turned the card over in her fingers. Taped securely to the back was a single, old-fashioned brass key. It was heavy, ornate, the kind of key that belonged to a forgotten door or a pirate's chest. Below it, a small, luggage-style tag was looped through the bow. On the tag was an address for a private vault downtown and a box number, 713. Eliza stared at the key. It made no sense. This was another one of his games, another of his quiet, infuriatingly passive gestures. Her instinct was to throw it in the nearest trash can, to sever this final, bizarre link to the man who had been a 7-year-long thorn in her family's side. But she didn't. The weight of the key in her palm felt significant. The sheer, baffling mystery of it was a hook. What could he possibly have to hide in a vault? Sentimental trinkets from his life with Clara? It seemed too elaborate for that. Despite every instinct screaming at her to ignore it, a seed of curiosity, sharp and persistent, began to sprout in the barren ground of her contempt. She slipped the key and the card into the pocket of her dress, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and irritation. The magnificent floral arrangement stood silent in the center of the hall, a beautiful, fragrant Trojan horse that had just been wheeled past her family's oblivious defenses. For the rest of the evening, the brass key felt like a hot coal in Eliza's pocket. She went through the motions, accepting condolences, nodding at the appropriate times, but her mind was elsewhere, circling the baffling mystery Liam had handed her. Her father, puffed up with pride over the magnificent flowers he had now decided were from an anonymous admirer of his business acumen, was holding court by the fireplace. Listening to him, Eliza felt a sudden, unfamiliar wave of exhaustion. The performance of it all, the endless maintenance of the Vance family image, suddenly seemed hollow and absurdly tiring. The next morning, after a restless night, she found herself driving downtown. She told herself it was a fool's errand, that she was simply tying up a loose end, exorcising the final ghost of her sister's unfortunate marriage. Yet she couldn't deny the knot of anticipation in her stomach. She parked in front of the discreet, granite-faced building of the Metropolitan Vault Company. Inside, the air was cool and silent, smelling of old paper and polished metal. A severe-looking woman behind a steel grill examined her driver's license, then the key. "Ah, yes, box 713. The co-signer is present," she said, her voice flat. "Right this way, Ms. Vance." Co-signer? Eliza's confusion deepened. The woman led her into a small private viewing room and returned a moment later with a heavy steel safe deposit box, placing it on the table with a solid thud. She left, closing the door softly behind her. Eliza stared at the box. For a moment she hesitated. Opening this felt like a transgression, a step into a world she wasn't meant to see. With a deep breath, she lifted the heavy lid. There were no jewels, no stacks of cash, no gold bars. The box contained only 2 items: a thick, legal-sized document, professionally bound in a simple navy blue cover, and a stack of 10 pages, handwritten on pale blue stationery, tied with a simple white ribbon. An envelope on top of the letters was addressed to her, Eliza. The handwriting was unmistakably Clara's. Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the first page. "My dearest Liza," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. It also means that I was right to worry. I imagine Dad has done something rash, something born of his pride. I imagine he has tried to push Liam away. I am so sorry for what you are about to learn, but I need you to know the truth. I need at least one person in our family to see the world as it really is, not as we wish it to be." Eliza's heart began to pound. "The man you and Dad and Mom have spent 7 years dismissing, the man you called my charity project, is the kindest, most brilliant, and most honorable man I have ever known. He is also one of the most successful. The reason you could never find his name on a list of partners or in society pages is because he works under a pseudonym. Liam is Ethelred." The name hit Eliza like a physical blow. Ethelred, the reclusive, mysterious architect whose designs were legendary, the genius behind the new Museum of Light, and the waterfront park everyone raved about. His work was on the cover of every major design journal. He was whispered about as a future Pritzker Prize winner. It was impossible. It was absurd. He let you all believe he was a simple drafter because he loved me, the letter continued. I asked him to. I was so tired of my life being defined by the Vance name, by money. With Liam, I could just be Clara. His secret was our private world, a place where none of the noise of our family could get in. He endured your insults, your condescension, all of it, for me. He did it out of love. And Liza, the money, the good fortune our family has had these last few years, the investments that always paid off, the loans that were so easily secured, that wasn't Dad's business savvy. That was Liam. He quietly funneled his own earnings into our lives, propping up Dad's failing company, buying the assets and placing them in my name to protect them. He did it so I wouldn't have to watch Dad's pride crumble. He did it to keep the peace. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She dropped the letter and her shaking hands reached for the blue-bound document. The title on the cover read, The Last Will and Testament of Clara Vance Sterling. She had even taken his last name, Sterling, a detail the family had pointedly ignored. She flipped it open. The legalese was dense, but the core of it was devastatingly simple. I, Clara Vance Sterling, being of sound mind, do hereby bequeath my entire estate, including all properties, stocks, bonds, and controlling interests held in trust, to my beloved husband, Liam Sterling. Then came the appendix. It was a detailed ledger, a clinical, irrefutable list of assets. And there it was, in black and white. 14 Willow Creek Drive, the Vance family mansion. A majority stake in Vance Industries Holdings, LLC. A portfolio of stocks and bonds worth a staggering amount. It was all there. The entire foundation of the Vance family's existence, their wealth, their status, their very home, had been secretly owned by Clara and was now, with the stroke of a pen, the legal property of the man they had just banned from her funeral. Eliza stumbled out of the vault building and into the harsh afternoon sun, the heavy documents clutched to her chest. The city looked alien, unreal. The honking of a taxi made her jump. Every confident assumption she had ever made in her life had just been systematically dismantled in a cold, quiet room. The world she had occupied, a world of clear hierarchies where she and her family floated comfortably at the top, was a lie. A fiction written and funded by the man she had mocked for 7 years. She drove home in a fugue state, the car seeming to pilot itself. She walked through the front door of the mansion, Liam's mansion, she thought with a sickening lurch, and found her father in his study. He was pouring himself a celebratory brandy, a self-satisfied smile on his face. "A splendid turnout, wasn't it?" he said, not looking at her. "It's important to maintain appearances. People respect the Vance name." Eliza looked at her father, at his expensive suit, his confident posture, and saw for the first time not a titan of industry, but a delusional old man, a king ruling over a kingdom of sand. Her trembling hand rose, and with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she slapped the will down on the polished surface of his antique desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Arthur looked up, startled, his bonhomie evaporating. "What is the meaning of this?" "Our family is a fraud," Eliza said, her voice a raw whisper. "And you are the biggest fool I have ever known." Arthur's eyes, annoyed and confused, fell upon the document. He picked it up, his expression shifting as he read the title. He scanned the first page, then the second. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray pallor. The brandy snifter slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble floor, the amber liquid pooling like blood. He sank heavily into his leather chair, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy and disobedient. He dialed Liam's number. It went straight to voicemail. His carefully constructed world, built on a lifetime of pride, was cracking at the foundations. He had banned a humble drafter from his daughter's funeral, only to discover he had in fact evicted God from his own church. Margaret, drawn by the sound of the shattering glass, appeared in the doorway, her hand at her throat. "Arthur, what is it? What's happened?" Arthur didn't answer. He was staring at the will, at the appendix, at the cold, hard, irrefutable truth of their ruin. Eliza looked from her father's broken form to her mother's terrified face. The grand, imposing study, filled with leather-bound books and portraits of ancestors, suddenly felt like a stage set for a play whose final, tragic act had just begun. Margaret's eyes fell on the documents, then on her daughter's face, a mask of grim, devastating clarity. The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. It wasn't what had happened, it was, what have you done? The unraveling did not happen all at once. It was a slow, methodical dismantling, executed with the chilling precision of a controlled demolition. The first shockwave hit the following Monday. The call came from Richard Gable, the manager of their private bank, a man Arthur had golfed with for 20 years. Richard's usually sycophantic, clubby tone was gone, replaced by a cool, professional frost. "Arthur, just a courtesy call," he began, the word courtesy feeling like a threat. "We've received notification of a change in ownership regarding the primary assets securing the line of credit for Vance Industries. We're going to have to place a temporary freeze on the account, pending a full review with the new primary stakeholder." "The new?" "Richard, what are you talking about?" Arthur blustered, trying to inject his old authority into his voice, but it came out thin and reedy. "The estate at 14 Willow Creek Drive and the associated investment portfolios," Richard said calmly. "They've all been transferred to the estate of Clara Vance Sterling, and subsequently to her sole beneficiary, a Mr. Liam Sterling. Our hands are tied, Arthur. We have to follow the paperwork." The click as he hung up was the sound of a door slamming shut. The next day, a courier on a motorcycle delivered a crisp legal envelope. It was not addressed to Arthur Vance, but to current occupants. Inside, on the letterhead of the city's most powerful real estate law firm, was a formal notice of ownership transfer for the property they were standing in. It was polite, civil, and utterly brutal. It informed them that the property was now under new management and gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days to dismantle a lifetime. Word travels fast in the rarefied air of high finance. Arthur's business partners, men who had toasted his success for years, began to call. Their voices were laced with a new, sharp edge of concern. Rumors were flying. Was it true that Vance Industries had lost its primary collateral? An emergency board meeting was called. Arthur, for the first time in his life, was not in control of the narrative. Confidence in his leadership and in the company's solvency evaporated overnight. The stock, which had been his primary source of pride, began a precipitous fall. For Eliza, the consequences were more immediate, more personal. She went to lunch at a chic downtown bistro, a place where she was known by name. At the end of the meal, she handed the waiter her platinum credit card. He returned a moment later, his face a mask of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Ms. Vance. It's been declined." A hot flush of shame washed over her. She fumbled in her wallet for another card. Declined. And another. Declined. The trust fund that had fueled her effortless, luxurious life had been, as she now sickeningly realized, funded entirely by Liam's quiet generosity. That tap had been turned off. Later that week, a tow truck arrived to repossess the sleek German sports car she had always considered a birthright. The atmosphere inside the mansion, Liam's mansion, grew thick and suffocating. The vast, echoing rooms, once a symbol of their power, now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of their spectacular fall from grace. Arthur was a ghost haunting his own life. He alternated between fits of impotent rage, where he would pace his study cursing Liam's name, and long periods of catatonic despair where he would simply stare out the window, a broken man. Margaret wept, her grief for Clara now hopelessly entangled with terror for their future. She avoided Arthur, her silence a constant, simmering accusation. Only Eliza seemed to find a strange, bitter clarity in the wreckage. The shock had stripped away a lifetime of artifice. For the first time she saw her family, her life, and herself with unflinching honesty. The shame was immense, a physical weight in her chest. But beneath it was something else, a flicker of resolve. She had been a bystander in her own life, a passive recipient of unearned privilege. The lies were gone. All that was left was the truth. One evening, sitting in her room, surrounded by designer clothes and expensive trinkets that now seemed like meaningless junk, she picked up her phone. She found Liam's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button, her heart pounding. What could she possibly say? An apology felt like a pathetic, inadequate gesture. But she had to do something. She pressed the button and listened to the rings, which were inevitably cut short by his voicemail. Taking a shaky breath, she began to speak. "Liam, it's Eliza," she started, her voice cracking. I know you have no reason to listen to this, but I went to the vault. I read Clara's letter. I know everything." Tears began to stream down her face. "I am so sorry. For everything I ever said to you. For everything I ever thought about you. We were fools. I was a fool. You were the best thing that ever happened to my sister, and we treated you like dirt. There's no excuse. I needed you to hear me say it. I'm sorry." She ended the call, sobbing, the single word echoing in the empty, luxurious room. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. It was the first truly honest thing she had said in years. A week after Eliza's tearful voicemail, a letter arrived. It was from Liam's lawyer, a man whose name was synonymous with corporate power in litigation. Arthur snatched it, hoping it was a negotiation, an offer. It was not. It was an invitation to a meeting. The time and place were non-negotiable. The location was not a sterile law office or a neutral hotel conference room. The address was for a construction site on the industrial side of town, an area the Vances typically only drove through with their windows up. As their taxi pulled up, they saw it, the skeleton of a large, modern building rising from the dirt and mud, a web of concrete and steel rebar reaching for the sky. A simple sign near the entrance read, "Future home of the Clara Vance Sterling Community Arts Center." They got out of the cab, looking small and out of place. Arthur's tailored suit was now rumpled, his posture stooped. Margaret clutched her handbag like a shield, her eyes wide with fear. Eliza, dressed in simple jeans and a sweater, looked around with a kind of pained awe. This was it. This was the dream Clara had talked about, the one they had dismissed as a flight of fancy. Liam was waiting for them in what would one day be the main atrium. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in worn work boots, dusty jeans, and a simple, rugged jacket. He held a rolled-up set of blueprints in one hand. He looked solid, grounded. He was not gloating. His expression was one of profound, weary calm. Standing a few feet behind him was his partner, David Chen, a silent, imposing figure whose sharp suit and sharper gaze made it clear this was not a social call. Arthur, propelled by the last fumes of his pride, spoke first. "Liam," he began, trying to sound reasonable, man to man. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding, a tragedy. In our grief, things were said, actions were taken that were regrettable, but we are still family. Clara would not have wanted this." Liam listened patiently, his eyes never leaving Arthur's face. He let the silence stretch after Arthur had finished, the only sound the distant clang of metal on metal from somewhere on the site. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried with an unnerving clarity in the cavernous, open space. "There was no misunderstanding, Arthur," he said, his tone even, almost gentle, which made the words cut even deeper. For 7 years, you made your position perfectly clear. You dismissed my work. You insulted my character. You belittled my love for your daughter. You treated me as something beneath you, an unfortunate circumstance to be tolerated. He took a step forward. You enjoyed the benefits of my success, the financial stability I provided for this family, all while mocking me for my perceived lack of it. You lived in a house I paid for and drank toasts to your own business acumen. You called me a parasite when in fact you were the ones living off of my life's work, a fact I was happy to hide for Clara's sake. His gaze was unwavering. And then, when she was gone, when the only thing left to do was to honor her memory with dignity, you denied me even that. You banned me from saying goodbye to my wife. You decided I was not family. So, no, Arthur, we are not family. You made that choice. Now you get to live with it. This was his list of grievances, delivered not with rage, but with the cold, hard finality of a judge's verdict. Arthur paled, speechless. It was Eliza who stepped into the breach. She moved past her father, her eyes filled with a shame that was raw and genuine. "He's right, Dad," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He's right about every single word. We were cruel. We were arrogant and blind. I was the worst of all." She turned to Liam, her eyes pleading. "Liam, I know my apology doesn't change anything. I know it's not enough, but it's real. I am so deeply, truly sorry for the pain we caused you and the disrespect we showed both you and Clara." Liam looked at Eliza, and for the first time since Clara's death, he saw a glimmer of his wife in her sister, a spark of honesty, a capacity for self-reflection. He gave a small, sad nod of acknowledgement. "This was never about revenge," Liam said, his gaze sweeping over all three of them. "Clara despised cruelty. This is about truth and consequences." He unrolled the blueprints on a nearby stack of drywall. This was her dream, a place for everyone, a place built on generosity, not pride. The mansion will be sold. The proceeds will create a permanent endowment for this foundation, in her name. It will do more good than a house ever could. He then laid out his terms, his voice leaving no room for negotiation. They would not be left destitute. He would not be as cruel as they had been. He would establish a small, modest trust for Margaret, enough for her to live simply and without fear. He would provide Arthur and Eliza with a single lump sum of seed money, enough to start a small business or find a new path, but not enough to ever reclaim their former status. They would have to work, to build something of their own, honestly. In return, they would sign a comprehensive, non-disclosure agreement and leave the city. They would disappear from the world that had known them as the Vances and start over, quietly. "The alternative," he finished, his voice dropping, "is that I do nothing. I let the company collapse. I let the banks foreclose. I let the truth of your financial ruin become public knowledge. The choice is yours. A quiet, dignified exit or public humiliation." The Vances stood in the shadow of the monument being built to the daughter they thought they knew, presented with the consequences of a lifetime of pride. The choice was clear. Their kingdom was gone. All that was left was to decide the manner of their exile. In the end, they accepted. There was no other choice. Arthur, a man hollowed out by the collapse of his own mythology, signed the papers with a trembling hand, his signature a weak, spidery scrawl that bore no resemblance to the confident slash it once was. Margaret, through her tears, seemed almost relieved to be free of the crushing weight of her husband's ambition. Eliza signed with a quiet resolve, looking at Liam not with fear or resentment, but with a profound, sorrowful respect. "Thank you," she whispered as she handed back the pen, and the words were not for the money, but for the lesson. It was a brutal education, but an education nonetheless. 6 months passed. The seasons turned. The story of the Vance family's sudden, quiet departure from the city's social scene became a brief topic of gossip before fading away. The official story, spun by Liam's discreet legal team, was that the family had decided to retire and pursue philanthropic interests abroad after the tragic loss of their daughter. The sale of the grand mansion on Willow Creek Drive was reported in the papers as a magnificent posthumous donation from the estate of Clara Vance Sterling, fully endowing the new community arts center that bore her name. The lie was kinder than the truth, and it was the last gift Liam would ever give them. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam stood on the finished rooftop terrace of the Clara Vance Sterling Community Arts Center. The building was magnificent. It was not a monument to wealth or power, but a living, breathing space filled with light and air. From the floors below, he could hear the faint, joyful sound of a children's choir practicing, their voices rising and falling like a hopeful tide. The building was already doing what it was designed to do, creating beauty. He wasn't looking at the architectural details. His gaze was fixed on the sprawling city skyline. He had won. He had dismantled his antagonist's world, reclaimed his wife's memory, and built her legacy. But it did not feel like a victory. There was no triumph, no vindictive satisfaction. There was only a quiet sense of rightness, of a balance restored. He had not crushed his enemies. He had simply held up a mirror and forced them to see their own reflections. He had refused to become like them, to let their bitterness poison his own heart. That, he realized, was the true victory. His grief for Clara was still with him, a constant, quiet companion. It no longer felt like a raw, open wound, but like a part of his own foundation, a source of strength and empathy. He had honored her not by destroying her family, but by building her dream. He had chosen creation over destruction. True worth, he thought, is not measured by the height of your house or the size of your bank account. It is measured by the integrity of your character and the quiet dignity with which you live your life. Respect is not something that can be demanded by a title or a family name. It must be earned through action, through kindness, through truth. The Vances had believed their dominance was their strength, but their greatest weakness was their inability to see the strength in his humility. Liam took a deep breath of the cool autumn air and turned away from the skyline, ready to go back to work. He had a world to build. It's easy to wish for spectacular revenge when we feel wronged. But as Liam's story shows us, sometimes the most powerful victory is refusing to stoop to the level of those who have hurt you. It's about choosing integrity over anger and building something positive from the ashes of your pain. What did you think of the choice Liam made in the end? Was it justice or was it mercy? We would love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you were moved by it, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the enduring power of the human spirit. Until next time, remember to be the person you want to see in the world.